The Russian rivalry is every US president's inheritance. It's been the case since the Second World War. But the last two presidents had a second rivalry to manage, the one with China. For all the differences between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, both men agreed on one thing: taming the dragon was critical. Donald Trump had its own approach: wage a battle with or without allies. Biden, though, is looking for partners. And that was his message at both the G7 and the NATO summits: a coalition of democracies against China. Now, not every American ally is convinced with this approach. The joint communique from NATO does not mention the term Cold War, but they see China as a security challenge.
China's growing influence and international policies presents challenges to alliance security. Leaders agreed that we need to address such challenges together as an alliance, and that we need to engage with China to defend our security interests.
How is China responding to all of this? Is it rattled? In the past, Beijing has brushed off criticism, called it outdated Cold War mentality. But now that NATO is game, does China have the appetite? What is the propaganda press saying? The Global Times called the G7 delusional. CGTN ran the headline, Biden's Cornwall crusade falls flat. Now, all these articles have one thing in common. It's not the usual bravado and firebrand rhetoric. China is almost playing the victim card, a peace-loving Asian powerhouse being villainized by the West. Even the Chinese Foreign Ministry is using this tone.
Forming cliques, engaging in group politics and drawing lines based on ideology, and forcing other countries to pick sides. This goes against the trend of the times of peaceful development and cooperation, and is doomed to unpopularity and failure.
Now, these are definitely uncertain times for Beijing. The G7 and NATO dealt them two separate blows. One, an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. This jeopardizes China's plan for world domination, no more checkbook diplomacy and debt traps. And two, NATO's declaration that China is a global security challenge. Being on the NATO's radar is not good news. This is the most powerful military alliance in history. So coming back to the question, is China rattled? Well, it should be. Until now, an alliance against China was limited to op-eds and books. This week, it became a reality. And this is not just about the G7 and NATO. These sentiments are echoed worldwide, in India, in South Korea, in Australia. These countries are not NATO or G7 members, but they share the vision of a rules-based democratic order. So China will definitely be worried. But it's not game over yet. There was a glimmer of hope at both the G7 and NATO, and it came from Europe. Joe Biden's game plan hinges on his allies supporting him, but once again, Europe finds itself on the wrong side of history. The French president says China is not in the Atlantic, hence it is not a threat. This is a bizarre approach to global security. It is also a double standard. Here is what Macron said about Russia. And I'm quoting, "We have to define clear red lines with Russia. After unacceptable behavior, we need sanctions. You see, Russia borders the European Union, so it is a security threat. China is far away, so it's not." Beijing has noticed this hesitancy from Europe. It is looking to drive a wedge between the allies. Look at what the Chinese spokesperson said. He believes Europe will never join America's war chariot.
The US is trying to draw ideological lines to form small groups targeting China. But the US and the European Union have different interests. The European Union is an independent body. Just now you mentioned the relevant European Union countries. They will not tie themselves to the anti-China war chariot of the United States.
China's plan makes sense on paper. A divided NATO will be a much weaker threat. But what are the chances of that happening? At the end of the day, Europe and America are joined at the hip. Their militaries, their economies, it's all linked. So if Joe Biden wants a Cold War, how long can Europe resist? So this week's flurry of diplomacy is a warning to Beijing. Two things can happen now. One, China reforms itself and becomes a responsible regional power, highly unlikely. And two, they continue on this war path and NATO changes its tone. Well, right now, China is a security challenge. Next rung on the ladder is security threat. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.